podcast episode, I interviewed Anna-Ruth Cockerham, Accessibility Manager at London Gatwick Airport. Anna-Ruth is passionate about advocating for the rights of disabled people and educating people about their diverse set of experiences and needs. She has recently been named in the UK's 100 most influential disabled people on the Shaw Trust Disability Power 100 list. Anna-Ruth answered questions on the passenger profile at London Gatwick, the trend of a desire for independent travel, and how it will drive new technologies and services. She also went on to discuss how making airports more accessible is not only the right thing to do, it makes business sense. And finally, gives her advice for airports who are in the beginning stages of their accessibility journey. I'm very, very excited to have her on the podcast today. Anna-Ruth, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So firstly, I'm interested to know what percentage of your passengers need extra assistance at the airport?
Yes, we see about 1 to 2% of our passengers use assistance at the airport. Varies month on month and between different routes. So certainly at this time of year, we see a lot more passengers travelling using the assistance service than we do, say, in the summer. But yeah, it's increasing in percentage as time goes on, and the needs of those passengers are changing as well.
So do you have any projections for how the passenger segment will increase in the future? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, so we're seeing an increase in passengers using the assistance service, particularly because, they're travelling to meet their family, for instance. We see older passengers travelling. But additionally, we see an increase in younger passengers with disabilities who are more interested in travelling independently as far as is possible. So they're not necessarily looking to use the assistance service for their whole journey, but more a personalised journey where they get assistance for the particular segments of their journey that they find difficult. So it's definitely a kind of changing passenger population.
Absolutely. And I was at Gatwick quite recently for a tour, and I saw this space that you have for passengers where they can rest. It's nice and quiet. It's not too stressful over there. So it's a really nice area of the airport that you've got the airside.
Yes. Yeah.
Are there any new passenger segments that you are seeing emerging that, are still quite small at the moment, but you think that they'll only set to improve?
We're seeing an increasing number of passengers with certain types of disabilities where they're interested in travelling more independently and perhaps even without using the assistance service as far as possible. So, for instance, there's some research that suggests that blind and partially sighted people would prefer to travel independently and without the use of the assistance service. And some of those uncertainties about whether they can travel independently or why they don't travel. So we're seeing with new technology, things like the We Assist app that we've trialled at Gatwick, which is a sighted guide app, or there's things like Ira that other airports have. We're seeing an increasing number of those passengers travelling and also talking about how they're interested in travelling because they can travel independently. And that goes for lots of other disability types as well. Passengers who have mobility disabilities who really would only like assistance for that portion at the gate when they're getting onto the aircraft. So it's a really changing passenger population and really moving away from the kind of wheelchair from door to gate kind of service.
Absolutely. Independence is so important to people, isn't it? So it's nice that they can try and do as much of that as possible. And what initiatives have you introduced for neurodiverse passengers?
Yes. So we have a huge range of things at Gatwick for neurodiverse passengers. We have our sensory room in the North Terminal. So that really caters to particularly our younger passengers with neurodivergences, provides a calming space, but also a sensory stimulating space. It's customisable to the passenger's needs, and families can book it or ask at the assistance desk to use it. And they find the space quite calming, quite helpful. It's a bit of a distraction from the hustle and bustle of the airport for the rest of their journey. But additionally, we're looking at how we design the airport to just generally be more accessible for neurodivergent passengers. So really taking in the new kind of British guidance on design for the mind, looking at how we can make it so that the terminals are just generally a more calming space, a more enjoyable space, or easier for people to navigate, and thus they can have as much of their journey as they would like.
Absolutely. And I've also seen that space that you mentioned. I could have stayed in there all day. It was so very soothing. What are the latest innovations or technologies that you have implemented to enhance accessibility, and how have they impacted the passenger satisfaction?
So recently, as part of the Future of Air Mobility Accelerator, we trialled an app called We Assist, and with a company called We Walk, who they produce technology for blind and partially sighted people. So their app, they've partnered with the RNIB, and the app connects passengers to a sighted guide trained by the RNIB who've been into Gatwick, who are familiar with the airport, who can give the passenger wayfinding directions and really open up the opportunity for them to travel through the airport independently and to personalise their journey and to have whatever different experience it is that they want to have, whether that's going to the shops or going to the lounges, or whether they just want to get, straight to the gate and through as quickly as possible. So really giving the passenger that ultimate choice and giving them the option not to use the traditional assistance service if that's something that they prefer. We trialled that app in partnership with the RNIB and WeWalk earlier this year. We got in a number of blind and partially sighted volunteers to trial it, and they all gave really positive feedback about how this would change their opinion about whether they would be interested in travelling by air, but also just make the journey more comfortable and more personalised. Some passengers saying it's something they'd use alongside the traditional assistance service, to give them more options in the departure lounge, and some passengers saying it's something that they would use in place of it. So we're really excited. We're looking at an operational trial for that later this year, but we're really excited to have trialled that and have seen the really positive impact that technology like that and apps like that have on our passengers.
Oh, that's really exciting. I look forward to hearing more about that then later on in the year. What is your biggest priority now then in your role for accessibility?
So we're really looking at how we can ensure that the airport is designed accessibly from the start. So as the airport develops and expands and as we do new things and refurbish things, how can we ensure that accessibility is thought into that? We know that an increasing number of our passengers want to travel independently. They don't want to have to use the assistance service all the time, but also they want to be able to accessibly experience the whole passenger journey, whether that is going to the shops, going to restaurants, going to the lounges, whatever it is that they want to do. So really looking at how we develop the airport to ensure that accessibility is built in from the start and that passengers have those options without having to rely on the assistance service.
And what is the biggest challenge that you face in making the airport accessible? Is it this legacy building structures that you have?
Yeah, I think legacy infrastructure is a significant part of it. It does make it very challenging. Some people say if you were going to build an accessible airport, you wouldn't start with the airport that we have currently. You'd probably knock it down and start again if you could. So that's always a significant challenge. But I think it's another challenge in how we make the airport accessible, but also how we let passengers know and give them that confidence to travel and know that the airport is accessible, is that a lot of passengers don't communicate with the airport directly, so they communicate with the airline. They get information about assistance and travel from the airline, and that is a really significant challenge when we want to talk about all the great things that we're doing at Gatwick, all the great services and facilities that are available. Often passengers don't know about them until they get to the airport, so it's really looking at how we can maximise that communication to disabled passengers and the disabled community about what is available at the airport to give them the confidence to travel and know what will be available and how accessible the experience will be when they get here.
And with increasing global regulations around accessibility, what future trends or developments do you foresee in airport accessibility, and how is your airport going to be preparing for them?
So I think that we will see a move away from everything that we think about in terms of accessibility being related to the assistance service. Currently the regulatory environment in the UK is very much centred around the assistance service and how the assistance service works and how it serves passengers. But we're seeing in the EU, for instance, with the introduction of the EU Accessibility Act, that's looking really much more about how the rest of the airport is made accessible to passengers. So the digital technology, self-service kiosks, flight information displays, all that sort of thing. So I think we're really seeing at that move to looking at how the wider airport is more accessible, and that's a really core part of our accessibility strategy. The assistance service is a substantial part of it, but actually it's about how do we make the whole passenger experience accessible from the start.
Do you think regulations have kept up, or is there still more that needs to be done?
I think that passengers really do want that independent, personalised journey as far as they can possibly have. And I think some of the regulatory environment perhaps over-focuses on the assistance service when that's not everything that passengers are looking for. However, that really is an important part of the journey for many of our passengers. That step of getting on or off the aircraft can be really challenging for some people. So it definitely is an important part, but I think it would be really great to see the regulatory environment move to being more focused on the whole passenger experience end to end, rather than specifically the assistance service.
Now, making airports more accessible is not only the right thing to do, it also makes business sense. I think they call it the purple pounds, don't they? What financial benefits have you seen as a result of investing in more inclusive infrastructure?
If you think that you have, let's say, 1 to 2% of your passengers are assisted, but actually 20% of the population in the UK has a disability, 20 to 25%. And that disability, whether it means that they require the assistance service in particular, or whether it just means that they're affected by kind of other barriers to travel, will be affecting their experience in the airport. So whether they feel comfortable walking through all the shops and duty free, is it too overwhelming a sensory environment for them? Can they get around easily? Are they more focused on getting to other facilities that they need before they travel, like a colostomy friendly toilet, for instance? So these kinds of things affect the passenger's journey, but also how confident they feel to do the rest of the kind of leisure activities and commercial activities in the airport that other passengers are really interested in doing. So the more that we can make that part of the journey easier and more accessible for passengers, the more that we can maximise their ability and their enjoyment of our kind of commercial offer. And that's something that we're looking at quite a lot at Gatwick. How do we bring, even for passengers who would prefer to dwell in the assistance lounge, for instance, how do we bring the commercial offer to them? So we've seen partnerships with the Starbucks in the airport, for instance, that offers a coffee ordering service and delivery that they bring to the assistance lounge in the South Terminal. And we have food ordering with the Wetherspoons in the North Terminal. And that's really about how can we bring and in the future expand that commercial offering for our assisted passengers, however it is that they need their journey to be, to make it accessible for them.
It's a fantastic idea, really innovative. Now, finally, what advice would you give to other airports who are in the beginning stages of their accessibility journey, and what would you say that they should prioritise?
I think I would prioritise how you make the airport accessible from the start. So really looking at how you develop things. What does the passenger need? What does any passenger need in an environment? You're building a gate room. What are the steps that they need to go through? What is the different infrastructure in the room for? What's the desk for? What's the seats for, etc.? And then think about what the accessibility requirements are of your passengers at the start. Kind of build that into the business case, into the design, into the plan from the start, and look at how you can then build that in places where perhaps it doesn't already exist, because that's the kind of thing that gives passengers the opportunity to have an independent journey. And obviously that can be really beneficial, particularly in an environment where we're seeing an increasing number of assisted passengers. So I think that's a really important start, and it can be quite easy to do, to communicate with the kind of local disabled community in your area and find out what their needs are and what their challenges are, what the barriers they're facing are, and then build that into your plan from the start. And once you build that in at the start, it doesn't cost as much as fixing it later.
Absolutely. I've heard retrofitting is an absolute nightmare. Anna-Ruth, that was my final question. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this International Airport Review podcast. Remember to subscribe to the magazine and the podcast channel to be notified every time a new episode is posted. Make sure you come back again soon to listen to our next guest.